We're talking them through iterations of the design, and we're looking at things together, different finish palettes. We're moving furniture around. We're looking at different architectural concepts within the space. And we're actually manipulating the model in real time with them inside the model with us.
Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are speaking with Jessica Mann-Amato. Jessica is an interior designer with over 20 years of client-focused design experience. She oversees workplace strategy, space planning, and interior design for Mancini's New York office, where she is a principal and shareholder. She utilizes cutting-edge technology to further the design process and bring each client's vision to life. She uses the company's state-of-art design lab to lead clients through proprietary 360 design sessions, which immerse them in the future space they are creating, which allows for a truly collaborative and interactive design process, which Jessica has always promoted with her clients. She has a lot of other stuff to list out here that she's accomplished and done, but I think you'll see from our conversation with her that she's well thought out, a really effective communicator, and it was a really interesting conversation. I think you'll enjoy it, and getting into the immersive experience of what they do with their 360 degree kind of almost first person viewer video game experience within design is really incredible. So please welcome Jessica Mann-Amato. All right. Well, Jessica Mann-Amato, welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us. I am excited to talk to you because when I was in architecture school, I elected to actually use ArchiCAD instead of the black screen and red, blue, yellow lines of, what was it? The other, I don't know, whatever other CAD software there was at that time. But ArchiCAD actually did 3D modeling, and you could actually walk through your models and everything else, which you couldn't do. And then Revit started to come on the scene, and by that time I was like, I don't think I want to be an architect because it's an incredibly hard job. And I have the utmost respect for you guys for making it through actually being an architect and the process of it and everything. It's a lot of work. But you have been utilizing the almost video game-esque 3D modeling process of designing collaboratively with clients and your team. And I watched a video on the link that you guys had sent us that was really incredible to see. I mean, you could see the other people where they were at in the model. You could potentially actually just say to them, like, well, if you turn to your left, you'll see yada, yada, yada.
Yes.
Walk me through, like, what's this been like to start? How far has it come? Where does it need to improve? Shake down the whole thing for me.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Trent. It's great to see you. So we sort of started it organically with a client of ours, Jan from Boqueria Restaurants. Jan talked to Christian about coming in and trying out our VR arena in our design lab to be able to walk his chefs through the kitchen in virtual reality so that they could really experience what the kitchen felt like, see if the size worked, see if there was adjustments that they needed to make to it so that he could kind of quickly plan out his kitchen designs for his restaurants. And
you hadn't done this already? You'd never done this, and you were able to just all of a sudden walk a client through a space like that ahead of time?
So we had created our VR arena, but it was sort of, typical. You put the goggles on, you walk through. You're not really manipulating the space. You're just viewing the space. Mm-hmm. But the tool belt, as it stands today, and the evolution of the tool belt sort of started with these sessions that we had with Jan. And as we're in these sessions, kind of tinkering with the client, being able to say, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could measure this? Or wouldn't it be great if we could move this furniture or try out a different finish palette? And so as we were going through the evolution of the process with him and all the ideas that came up, that sort of started our tool belt as it is today. which really gives you a palette to interact within the VR environment.
So walk me through what it's actually like to be a client and come to your studio, or they do it online collaboratively, however it is. Like, what would happen to me? Like, do I put goggles on? Do I stand inside of like the little ropes that you'd have at a movie theater when we used to go to movie theaters? You know, so
Right.
you don't walk off the thing, or how do you walk through? Like, what's the experience like, just from a physical and mental interaction point to begin with?
So, before the client comes in, obviously we've gone through a process of creating a bunch of different interior options, finished palettes, furniture options, architectural options within the space. We're using Revit, Rhino, SketchUp, and they all interact with our toolball system. So it used to be pre-pandemic, and we're finally getting back to it, thank God, that the client would come into our design lab and they would put on the goggles and they would be in our arena, which is essentially a carpeted area, which has an outline of the space that you can walk around in the goggles with.
Oh, so you have a
you're
huge area?
It's about 20 by 20.
Okay, so pretty good.
Yeah. So part of our tool belt, which is great, is that you can move around in the model. There's a set of feet, and so you can kind of click and you can move around in the model. So not only can you look around and experience it by literally moving around, you can jump around in the model itself. So you don't actually have to move around within the VR arena that much.
Okay, so you can kind of use controls to like, well, I'll push forward on this button and I will walk forward and go. Okay.
Exactly. Or you could just stand in place and walk around by pushing different controls. Very similar to how you would use a gaming interaction software. So pre-pandemic, we're in the room with the clients. Our design team would be in the room. And as the client is experiencing it, we're talking them through the design. We're talking them through iterations of the design. And we're looking at things together, different finish palettes. We're moving furniture around. We're looking at different architectural concepts within the space. And we're actually manipulating the model in real time with them inside the model with us. So that, I think, is really what kind of sets us apart, is that we...
So when you're like looking, the video you had sent, or that was in that link, was a recording of clients maybe going through a space that you had designed. Do you know ahead of time, like, well, this island we have here with these chairs, let's preload 10 options for finishes for this island and another 10 options for the different types of chairs, and you can just change that?
That's part of it. So we preloaded. So in Boqueria, we were doing, server stands and wine display options. And so we had designed multiple options and we would preload them. Okay. We would preload a finished palette. We would preload a lot of furniture. So that is part of it. And that sort of gets us to different iterations as we're walking through the model together. But we also literally adjust the Revit families in real time with the client in the room. So if we get to where we kind of like something, but we don't like the way a detail is working out, or, we want to change it to multiple finishes instead of one finish, just different iterations of it, we can actually go in and adjust the Revit model in real time with the client. So they're watching the iterations happen live. They're watching us build that component of the family while they're in the model with us. So it's a very immersive experience for them as we walk them through the design process, because they're in the model and we're talking to them about it and we're tinkering with them. They're really an integral part of the team as we come up with, the final design decisions. And it's extremely time saving, because instead of the way that we all used to do it, right, where we come up with a presentation, we print it out, we go through it, or maybe we're showing it on a screen, and then we decide on some changes we want to make, we go back, we take 3 weeks and do it again. Now we're literally doing what could take 3 weeks and 3 hours, and we're doing it in real time with the client. So it saves a lot of time and it helps them to come to consensus very quickly.
Wow. two interesting and one question you may not want to answer because it might be a little too business personal, or personal business. I don't know. The resulting design, by having so much of an uneducated mind being present, like sometimes you want to design something and you know what's right, but the people you're maybe designing for have really bad taste. And in this case, you might be bringing in really bad taste to a situation. So this is a difficult thing to answer, obviously, but how much has it affected the end result, the deliverable? Do you find that the design and the fit of the design, like a glove to the end client, is just that much better? Or does it get a little muddied because of the uneducated opinions starting to bleed in?
I have to be honest, we've been really lucky in that I think it has created a much better final solution because it really is a collaborative teamwork effort. And everyone has sort of bought into the initial design concepts and developing the concepts together. So we all feel ownership of it, from the design team to the client to some of the consultants even that are doing this with us. So we've been really lucky in that it has worked out in our favor. I completely understand what you're saying. I've been through that many times. I think that was more of an issue when we would print things or show things on a screen. But I think because of the nature of this, that we can kind of tweak it together with our guidance of walking them through it, we have been able to make great decisions along the way for every project. We haven't ended up with anything that would make me upset to publish with our name on it.
So two other questions I'd have here. Let me make sure I can remember them. Let's see, how would I word that? To get to that point, do you start with paper sketching and then like foam core models and then kind of solidify something and then present a VR walkthrough? Or is it like just straight from schematic sketch paper to then Revit model to then being able to walk through it?
So we do typically still start, pulling the trace paper out, doing some sketches of big ideas. We do a lot of whiteboarding here in the office as we're coming up with big conceptual ideas. And then we're going into what we call our planning palette, and we're starting to plan in Revit. So essentially from the minute we start doing an actual test fit or big conceptual ideas, it is in 3D. So from initial test fit, we're walking clients through in a black and white immersive environment so they can see and feel, multiple locations potentially that they're looking to move to. And then we go from there, as we start to develop finishes and lighting and furniture. And so it really is, that's part of what we didn't necessarily like about the design process. Of course, we don't want to lose the sort of the freedom of like sketching those ideas and collaborating with the team on those ideas, but we also wanted to be very immersive from the literal start of the process. We felt like there was a lot of time kind of wasted in all the presentations that you're creating that are 2D. And if we could just get the client and even the team immersed into the design very early in the process, that it would help to speed along the schedule. And it would also help us to focus our time more on developing the design during design development, where we really should be spending a lot of our time and energy.
Interesting. So the thing that comes to my mind that I've learned from the work that I do around design is all compacted into 8 to 12 hours in a single day. And so it's a really high pressure. You've got to be able to communicate and execute within that single day. It's not like an architectural project that goes on for years, Now, the thing I've found is that I have to be far more adept at listening to a client and being able to fully explain my response in the moment by working in the way that I do. It's taught me to do that. Like a client will say, what if we put the camera over here because I like that over there? I have to be able to look at that, and then I have to be able to explain to the client either wow, you found something really great here, we're going to do this. Or I have to say, well, if you look at this, what happens is the apex of the corner of this table starts to point right at this other, corner, and that kind of creates a visual conflict. Like you really develop a vocabulary to explain why aesthetics work and don't work in the moment, which I would imagine would be an extremely important thing in your field, especially with this VR tool.
Absolutely. And you really hit on a good point. We're essentially letting the clients almost inside of our heads, right? To explore our ideas with us. So we really do have to be on. We have to be able to explain every little thing. We have to have very definitive ideas, and we have to be able to pivot in order to, get to an ultimate goal that aligns with everything we learned about the client in the beginning of the process, their vision and their goals and qualitative and quantitative results for them. So absolutely, you have to be able to pivot constantly because they are seeing things in real time. And one of the things that we see quite a lot is, and I'm going to relate it back to how we used to do things. It used to be that you would go into a model and maybe you would develop, say, the reception area and a boardroom and some sort of key areas, and you fully develop those, and maybe you're doing photorealistic renderings, but you're not doing so much with the other areas. You're still doing kind of 2D construction documents for those areas. With this, they can walk around and look at everything.
Right.
So you have to be extremely honest as well, because it still has to follow a traditional process of how we're developing it. And so there are areas that are more developed and areas that are not as developed. And so we can talk that through with them. And as we progress through, it will become more and more developed, but it still follows that same process that they're seeing that. They're literally seeing that.
Right.
That you haven't had time potentially to think about some areas. And so they're seeing it when it's underdeveloped. And you just have to be extremely honest about how the process works.
So that has a strong correlation to how we work occasionally. And this next Friday, a job like 2 minutes before I came on here came up that we're getting a pretty cool commission to do on an island up north. But they want us on very short notice to do both a still shoot and a video shoot. And the very interesting thing about doing video along with still photography, especially from an architectural client's perspective, is that with still photo, you can curate and edit out all the things that you don't like about the project very easily. Just frame that, and that's all you get. It's this single frame, perfect it, make it look great. Nice. But when you work with video, if you have movement, like if you have a single unmoving frame and something passes through it, that's, okay, that's pretty controlled. But, larger movement throughout a space reveals all the issues that maybe didn't get solved that you'd like to not see sometimes,
Right.
And by working in this VR model type of way, it seems like you're forced maybe to actually solve more of those problems, or those problems become far more obvious sooner in that design process.
Absolutely. They become far more obvious much faster. And I think it ultimately makes us better designers, because at the end of the day, I think not only as a team, but also with the client, we're really thinking through everything. So every little detail is fully developed by the end of the process. And we can very quickly go in and explore what's working, what's not working, how we need to adapt it. And, what I found is so amazing about this tool is that some people can visualize things in 3D in their head. I've always kind of been able to do that. I can
Right.
walk through the environment. I can, apply different finish palettes. I can just imagine what that looks like. Some people can't. There's a lot of people in our industry who literally cannot. And so to be able to use it as a tool to work with your team to explain everything that we're talking about, the problems that we're trying to solve, potential issues when you're looking at how things are constructed, potential, hits with ductwork, how you're integrating lighting, all of that. You can really delve much deeper to a different level of how you're designing and detailing it than I think we typically do when we're just looking at 2D, printed construction documents.
There's an interesting comparison that if you look at like architectural drawings for an old home that's still standing, like something from their, late 1800s. I mean, they had like a very rough floor plan, and not rough, but, a detailed floor plan, but not a lot of sections and stuff going on, and, like elevations. And a lot of times that was about it, but these things had an extremely timeless, the ones that are still standing, obviously, had a fairly timeless, not aesthetic, but a quality to them that kept them around. But they arrived with this extremely minimal, very little, design in some way. And it's interesting to look at. You look at all the old houses that are still standing, and it's either that they had a better aesthetic sense back when information didn't constantly overload you all the time. Maybe there's something about our culture further back where aesthetics were a little bit more understood than now, because you go around, like, I'm part of a Facebook page on Facebook. I'm part of a Facebook page called it's like architecture shaming. And they have all these horrible examples of design, by people who may not have an education in it, but have had enough money to build a house and do it big, but very, very bad, And you kind of just assume that people from the past, for what is still left over that they did, it looks really nice. And I imagine we just probably tore down the other junk. So that's fine. But I wonder, like, how we did things in the past with very tactile hand drawings compared to doing this, like, it's the Seinfeld analogy from a episode way back when Seinfeld was on, that there's this idea of good naked, bad naked. And he tries to show his girlfriend, like, me using a power sander naked, bad naked, and there's something about using this VR that, in a good way, shows you the bad parts of the design so you can work on them and make them that much better. And I wonder if it's a very interesting take for me to look at past design that's still standing and their process and our process for designing and what we get, yet we still have a lot of bad design that actually makes it to brick and mortar. I don't know what to make of that.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. There was, I think, sort of a simplicity to it, and yet at the same time, it was highly detailed. There's a beauty to the hand sketches that architects did at that time. But I think, the point that I would take away from that is, it's sometimes you just have to know when to stop designing. And definitely the technology makes it harder, I think, to kind of stop. You're not putting the pen or pencil down and stopping the process, and what you've done is great and you're moving forward from there. You're kind of constantly tinkering, constantly iterating.
Right.
And so maybe there is a point in some of the designs that it was absolutely perfect, but you keep pushing some things. Or maybe because you've continued to push it, that's what makes it perfect in the end. I think it's probably sort of depends on each project. But I've thought about that many times too. Is there a time where we really just need to put the pen down and stop?
I heard a quote from I think it was a musician that it was, I'm going to butcher it, but it was something about you never get to perfect a song. You just have to choose when to release it. And there's something to that this idea of making something that is a absolutely one-off creation, like a building is these days, and has always been, that there's no ability for perfection because there's no standard outside of that building because it's the only one. So there's that moderation of desire for perfection, contrasted with this is what it is supposed to be, and there is no making this better. So it's a weird realization that I had a while ago, that if you're trying to work towards perfection, you're not being original. There's an idea that if there's an outside standard that you're trying to hit, then it's not true to what the call in front of you is. And you're kind of taking, it's kind of like ego saying, no, we can be as good as this other thing maybe. I don't know.
Right. I've also always sort of felt that specific to interiors, definitely that part of what makes the project so great is its ability to adapt over time. And that if we have designed it well, that it can evolve and withstand the test of time, through the years and with the client's specific needs as they change over time. So I think that, potentially that's what makes it more perfect. And if it's not able to adapt to that, then in some ways we've sort of failed.
That's an interesting point. I've never considered that, especially for interior designers, you are working on a different time cycle compared to the architecture of the building, because the interiors are far more, their style cycle is, it's going to have a 5 to 10 year run, and then it's going to start to feel dated no matter what until you're, doing mid-century modern. But even that kind of, went out, came back in, and maybe is now on the way out a little bit. Who knows? And that's something I've never considered. What's your feeling on that, knowing that whatever you're doing on an interior, the materials, the furniture, the design of the furniture, knowing that this is something that's not disposable, but knowing that the likelihood that this will be disposed of in fairly short order compared to the bones and the layout of the building is on that different cycle.
Right. As a young designer 20 years ago, it bothered me. But I think as I get older, and I've been doing this for a long time, I think that's part of what I love about it, is that ability to adapt with the client. And so the hope is that we're not necessarily disposing of everything, but that if we've designed it with adaptability and flexibility in mind, then we can come in and make some little tweaks that will be able to adjust it, that will keep it sort of timeless throughout a longer period of time. And also, I think more importantly, even, is that it's able to meet their current needs. With a lot of my longstanding clients, I've worked with them for, 15, 20 years, some of them from the very beginning of my career. And being able to adapt their spaces as their needs change. And, especially right now in the last, 15 months, we've seen so much rapid change when it comes to interior design. So I think for a big takeaway for me coming out of this pandemic is that more than ever, we need to make sure that our spaces are adaptable and flexible. And not only do they have to be able to adapt to changing client needs, but they have to be able to adapt without disposing of everything and quickly. And the client needs to be able to do it themselves without having to call all of their consultants back.
Right.
Because, leases are much more short term now. We don't necessarily know what the future holds. So we're all kind of designing with this idea in mind, but we will have failed if it's not adaptable and able to take them into the future.
Sure. Huh. That's that cycle. I've never really put interior spaces on the cycle of like that, the fashion cycle of, it's whatever the time of year is, fashion, whatever in Paris, they go and display all their designs. That cycle is like an annual cycle. And then interior design is more of maybe a decade cycle. Right. And then like you can look at a exterior of a building and you can say, oh, that's dated. But that is more so on like a 25 to 50 year cycle. I don't know. Like for commercial buildings, that's interesting. I wonder what governs that and why. I'd imagine there has to be something to the effort put into the substance that determines the length of cycles. So if you're thinking clothing, obviously far more turnaround or quicker turnaround, and then interiors slower, and then architecture even slower. That's weird.
Right. It's the life cycle of the materials, it's meeting current energy code. It's how the building is kind of aging. And I love walking around the city in New York because you see all these buildings getting reskinned, and you take a building that looked very dated and it looks brand new when it's reskinned. And there's almost it's like the city's getting a facelift in the last 5 to 10 years. It looks like a drastically different city than it did. Right. But it's so interesting to see all these buildings take on a new life and a completely new identity. And in some cases, there's not that much that's happened to them other than they're getting a new skin.
Right. Yeah, that is, let's see, I had a shoot in Boston last week, And on the following day, my sister was visiting from Tennessee, and we were going to go do the very touristy Boston thing and do the Freedom Trail and all that. So I had my family come down. My assistant drove our work car home, and my family came down. We stayed at a hotel, and we walked around the city, and it was really neat to just walk around the city and say, "Oh, Daddy shot in that building. Daddy shot in that building. In that building." It was fun to show my kids what I do, to a degree. But then I saw a building actually being reskinned, like a, I don't know, 50-story building. And it's the first time like I've ever seen that done. And I didn't know that this was something that people did a lot, and it was really neat to see. They're halfway through it, and the top half is like late 80s and the bottom half is present. And we bumped into someone who knew about the project and was telling us like, yeah, they're going 5 floors at a time. So they take 5 floors, they move all the tenants out and maybe move them up or down a floors. I don't know how they deal with it, but they do 5 floors and they do the process, and then they start on the next 5 and do the process. And it's just, man, the logistics of something like that, I just can't imagine, someone's in charge of that.
It takes years of planning.
Oh, yeah. They're not sleeping
That's us
well
a lot.
Yeah.
It's a long process. And I think, you have very diligent project managers that are managing it every step of the way. And you're biting off little chunks of it as you go in order to get to that ultimate result. But yes, we have, we're doing TSX in Times Square, and we've had a team that's been on it for, I think, 6 years already. Oh, wow. And it will be many, many more years. And wow. That's one of the things that I always find so interesting with young architects, is that I think that in their mind, when they graduate school, the timeline for how these things get built is so much shorter than the actual timeline. And so they don't realize they'll be working on, exterior details of how you're reskinning a building or how you're doing the structure of the building for years on end.
Right.
And it's not necessarily all sexy design concepts for the building the whole time.
Yeah,
but it's
that is why I'm an architectural photographer initially. Like, I love what I do, but the realization within the practice of architecture is that the turnaround time on creativity for a project, not just, daily detail creativity, but the entirety of a project, the turnaround time on that was so exhausting for me at, 1 year to 5 years. The realization of that to me was just, my wife and I have been married 19 years now. I hope she doesn't listen to this, and I hope I got it right. But I believe it's 19 years. And yeah, because if it had been 20, we'd have a much bigger celebration, I imagine. So it was 19 years. But, that realization was just, I needed a quicker turnaround. And to iterate like the necessity for that turnaround, we've been married 19 years, and I think I've had almost 20 different cars during that time. And they're not expensive cars. They're just odd cars that I was like, ooh, I want to try this and experience that. And then I get bored of it. And I want to try this and experience that. And I get bored of it. And I think my personality suits photography far more than the practice of architecture, although I love design. But yeah, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing anyways. So
absolutely, it sounds like you found your calling.
Yeah. So you guys are actually handling a reskinning of a building in your firm?
So we're actually building a building. Essentially, we're taking the bottom floors of the building. We're raising it up. It is an old theater. The Niederlander Theater, and we're raising it. And then we're building an entire building on top of it. And so that's the TSX project in Times Square. It's been going on a very long time. It's an extremely exciting project. Wow. There's a lot of, big public and retail in the base of it, a theater, and then potentially a hotel for the upper tower. So it's a great long-term project.
Yeah. Are you taking an entire downtown building and lifting the entire thing?
We are lifting the theater. So it is a historic theater, and we're preserving the historic theater. So we're literally taking this theater, slowly kind of dismantling some components of it, lifting it, and then reassembling it.
Do you know how much it weighs?
I do not. I'd have to ask the TSX
Jeez.
team. I wasn't part of that part of it, but and I think, it'd be interesting to see what components of it are sort of slowly disassembled, put to the side, and then put back together, and how much of the actual weight of the structure that's being lifted is. But yeah, talk about logistics.
Yeah. It's funny to me, like the things that capture different people's imaginations. Me and my two little boys will watch like YouTube videos on just the like really, really technical things, like the history of gears, like just gears. And, all three of us are just sitting there wide-eyed, fascinated.
I love that.
How much does the theater weigh?
So speaking of, my 5-year-old daughter loves what I do, because she'll sometimes look at what I'm working on and it's like a video game to her, or it's like a movie as we're going through our projects. And so so what we've done since the pandemic is we've taken Tool Belt and we've made it so that you can download a link and you can do it from your home. So, we can have 20 people in the model with us, all from the comfort of their laptop at home. And it's been a great tool for us to be able to adapt it in that way. We didn't miss a beat during the pandemic. But for me, I think it's so cool to watch my daughter experience that. It's like seeing a client the first time you present an amazing design to them and they get very excited about it. And she's always super excited about everything that we're working on. And that's fun to see, fostering that imagination in that generation.
Oh, yeah. So if you see me writing stuff down, it's not because I'm bored with what you're saying and I'm texting someone, but I have to write like questions I have down as they come to me, else I totally forget them. But so that's really interesting to me. Your daughter now, she's able to really get involved and see what you really do by experiencing your creation in virtual reality. And I wondered, children are so much more emotionally present. They maybe can't articulate their emotions into words, but they are so much more feeling than the rest of us. And I wonder, like, if there's some key to design that you could far more have children experience a virtual reality space and see what the consensus is among 30 kids that go through it, compared to this type of space with these shapes and this light, compared to kids going through this. Like, you could really distill the emotion of the space by, paying child labor to, experience a space and get their feeling from it. Yeah, just a weird question there, but.
No, that's so true. And it's part of what we do as we're starting the design of a space. There's so much that's emotional about design, even for adults. And so, sometimes your big ideas are very abstract. Sometimes they're sort of based in emotion, and emotion that the client wants to evoke in the space, a feeling the client wants to evoke in a space. So it is highly emotional. And I think everyone experiences that in very different ways, and things resonate with people in different ways. And that's part of something, that you were talking about earlier. We have to be so keyed into how people are reacting to things and how they're experiencing it as they're walking through it, things that they're focusing on for a long time. You have to be so keyed into that, I think, to really be able to kind of dive down into what clients like and how you're moving forward and adapting together.
Right.
Be great at reading a room, even from afar.
Right. So there's one interesting point and an interesting question. Like, my wife can look at a space, but she can't tell you, like, she cannot articulate why she does or doesn't like it. She can only tell you positive or negative. So she can emotionally experience and give you feedback as positive or negative, but she cannot articulate the reasons within that our aesthetic perception as to why they're good or bad. My wife and I are very opposite. I'm very visual and she's far more relational in that way. And I wonder what the I mean, as a deeper question, I wonder what the cause or what the wiring for people is that you know, you can, because like I was saying, when I work with clients and they say, why don't we try this? I have to be able to articulate why we wouldn't do something that someone who's paying me a good amount of money to do something has asked me to do. I then have to verbalize respectfully and non-offensively why I think their idea is not going to work and why we should do this. Or I say, yeah, that's a great idea. It's a real interesting thing to be able to pull that out. But also, like you were saying, the beginning of a process can be far more emotional, that you then turn in. You take a very emotional and subjective input to a large degree from a client, and then you have to absorb it subjectively and emotionally, and then you have to turn it into some then objective thing. How do you like, my emotional journey as an adult has been very interesting to me anyways. I probably plot on about it too much, but how do you interact between your emotional self and your like more articulated knowledge self to listen to them working together to actually produce something in the real world? Have you thought about that much, or can you talk about it at all?
A lot. Yeah. I think as a young designer, you're much more emotional about everything that you do. And as you progress in your career, you have to get to the point where you can kind of put the emotions aside and let reason take over. And for me, I started my career doing residential design. I worked full time the whole time I was in school. And I learned a really valuable lesson then about how emotional every project is for every client, right? And that it could be the tiniest little thing that a client would focus on that would kind of, set them off and would make the project great, or would ultimately make you have to go back to the drawing board. So I think there's a lot of it that's almost like being a psychologist, right? You really have to fine tune your listening skills. You have to be present in the moment. You have to listen really well. And then you have to be able to have a lot of questions that sort of drill down into the things that are not immediately clear that they're talking about. So at the end of it, when you're listening well, you're asking questions, and then you're kind of exploring solutions together. You can come up with something that is a good result for the client. It can be difficult. Some clients immediately tell you what they like you were saying, and some clients can't express it. And so you're just kind of digging to try to get that information out of them. And then that is really where the iterative process of design comes in. It's like, I think this is what you're saying and this is what you like. And so we've taken everything we've learned and we've come up with these 3 options that we'll walk you through. And we need to see, your reaction to these. But these are the reasons we think they work based on what we learned from you. So it's a lot of things, really. I think you just, if you're not a good listener, this is not the profession for you.
Right. So to me, that's a really interesting point. It's nice to see in someone that realization and that embrace of those 2 things together. Because in my experience and my culture growing up, emotions, your kind of more articulate knowledge posture was more uplifted as something to look up to in the culture I grew up in, more so than your emotional presence. Is kind of like your emotions were something that needed to be controlled by your articulate knowledge. And this could be totally just my weirdness and my perception within a completely fine culture. I'm not sure. But to me, it was like, all right, I got to take these emotions and I got to leave childish things behind in some way. And I have to embrace, the logical and rational to control the emotions. And the thing I've really found is I have far, far more depth perception and can listen and experience and absorb more when I am emotionally present. But as being me, it's extremely difficult to turn off that articulate knowledge chatter and thou shalt achieve and keep going and make as much money and be as well received and be lauded as good at what you do as possible, because this could all end at any moment. Like I woke up this morning under some weird, serious stress from like a very specific dream about work I was having that I couldn't actually.
Oh, I get those all the time.
Oh, I hate it. Like, and that's the first
worst
one I've like. In the past, I would always have dreams that I did not like. I failed a test in high school and I have to repeat a year. But I've never had a work stress related dream. And for some reason this morning, I woke up just like just a shot, like someone set off a shotgun in our room. And the odd thing was I woke up like right before my alarm went off, and I was able to turn it off before I woke everyone else up. But there is that real weirdness where I grew up feeling like this emotional side you need to grow into being primarily this knowledge thing that's articulate, rather than this embrace of the two. And as I've embraced the two, I've gained so much more in my life by doing that. And it's really neat to see that someone's able to do that and practice it in their profession as well.
I absolutely agree. I've always felt like the more you can kind of embrace your sort of emotional self and then be able to articulate those emotions well, that really makes everything in your life so much richer. I think it's when we're, stifling our emotions that we're not experiencing sort of everything we experience in our day-to-day life to the fullest. So but it is interesting because I have to be able to switch, right? Because some clients are highly emotional and some clients are very academic and strategic. And so we as a design team really have to be able to kind of jump and cater the way that we're presenting and speaking to the clients a little bit to how their brain works. And still keeping true to the way that, we practice and that we are as a firm.
In working with clients, what has been your experience with dealing with fear, both yourself and perceiving that a client is anxious or stressed or responding to fear on their end in some way? Because I found that I had areas of fear in my life that were causing me to hold on to certain ideology that did not allow me to progress in other ways. And something about dealing with those things in the closet like that, if you don't approach that fear with honesty and truth, it festers and it becomes a very odd thing over time. In a professional practice, have you been perceptive of that and been able to sense it and come to a way of dealing with it?
Absolutely. And honestly, I think that's what makes me good at what I do. I think that's why my clients continue to come back to me. I'm very real and literal and honest in everything that I do. And so when that happens, and it happens a lot, I just confront it head on. What do you like? What do you not like? What's holding you back? What do you have concerns over? It's really about that sort of being that psychologist in the situation. And
so you go right for the fear in some ways.
I go right for it. I go right for the fear. Absolutely.
That's good. That's a good approach.
Yeah. And it's always worked well for me. And I think that I've witnessed when people don't address it, and I think it does fester. And I think then it sort of becomes this uncomfortable relationship because the client's uncomfortable. You don't quite know what they're uncomfortable about. You can't address it. It doesn't become a collaborative kind of teamwork environment. And to me, when you're just very honest about everything from the beginning, you're honest about the whole process, and you do get that teamwork environment, it's just such a better result because ultimately everyone's much happier with it.
Right. Yeah, it's a really interesting it's a really interesting aspect of our psyche and our social experience that we live now at this point of our evolution, that fear is far, far less of a factor in many ways. I mean, we don't have to worry about bushes rustling and tigers jumping out of them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's really us that might be in a bush trying to attack us, humans. we have to worry about just our own species attacking. Like I don't think tigers probably walk around fearing other tigers as much as we as humans walk around fearing other humans.
Right.
But that thing I wonder if in totality, if that is something that's fading from our culture because of the advancement of technology and everything else, that takes away from us the need to actually go out and physically turn the ground, plant a seed, water it, and pull it out and eat it, or physically hunt something ourselves every time, all the time. It's kind of like we're going to this place where if you fast forwarded our evolution, 2,000 years, we might end up looking like actual aliens, big heads, absolutely no hair anywhere on our bodies, and just kind of skinny and pasty. Because, anymore, what is the real need for a strong physical presence to defend yourself? It's not that needed in our society. And so the people more so like the Bill Gates types are the ones that succeed in this technological environment of our existence. So I wonder how our just even our appearance changes over time. But I wonder in the professional workplace, that response to fear, that's just an interesting thing to consider. Mm-hmm. Where, in thousands of years past, how fear was handled at that point compared to how it's handled now and to hear your feedback on it. That's really interesting. So
this is actually something I've thought about a lot because I think that people have different types of fear now. They have FOMO, so much FOMO.
Now, what's FOMO?
Fear of missing out.
Oh, yeah.
And
because of social media.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, I think that there's, I deal with this with young designers and architects where there's a very real fear to interact with people in person because that's not how they interact. They've grown up interacting, texting and chatting. And so there is almost a social anxiety, I think, that's developed in younger generations that is a very real fear to them of interacting. And so that's something I have to work at a lot with my younger architects and designers to sort of work them through that so that they can feel comfortable. Because in this business, I feel like you succeed when you're able to collaborate really, really well with everyone on the project team. It's not only about the design and architecture team and the client, it's also all of the consultants. It takes an army of consultants to get our jobs done.
Right.
So we have to interact constantly. And if we're sort of interacting behind the computer all the time and we're never picking up the phone or meeting with people face to face, sometimes you're not able to communicate as effectively. Sometimes it takes longer to communicate. So I've thought about this a lot, and I watch it with my 5-year-old daughter because her instinct also, I'm sure you experience this with your kids. The instinct is not there anymore to collaborate face to face all the time. It's much more, let me do something on my laptop.
Right. So,
and I think about all the social anxieties and fears that will come from that.
So, my culture that I speak of, that I came from, was a fairly fundamentalist religion, and that's an unfair painting of it, but it's an honest painting of it. But the collective cultural painting of it is like bonnets and multiple wives. That's not what it was, but it held belief in an extremely literal fashion, and other than that, visually looked like a normal, evangelical, whatever. And so, some of the result of that is that my wife does a lot of gardening and we homeschool our kids, and my kids don't have any devices or anything else that they're actually on. I mean, Daddy has devices that he overuses all the time, and I'm working on that. But we haven't put our kids on that. And to watch them, it's interesting because my oldest son is extremely, I don't know that I've ever met a kid like this, how verbal and emotionally articulate he is. Like he like I'll take my kids surfing, and my youngest kid is just gung-ho. There is no fear in him. He's going for it. And my oldest will say, the clouds are making me feel a little kind of not comfortable today. It's a little too dark. I'm just going to sit on the beach and not surf. like he just verbalizes his fear. And it's such a useful, beautiful, and wonderful thing to see. He doesn't have to struggle with that. He just knows how to verbalize it, like as a personality trait. And my younger son, he is far less likely to actually like approach someone and talk to them. He's very, very reserved, more so like me as a younger person, that he's not as verbal, but he's extremely physical and not aggressive in a negative way, but like he goes for it in whatever he's doing, you know? And so it's interesting to see, like, these kids have almost zero interaction with phones or iPads or anything like that, and yet one is, you know, extremely social and then the other is not. So I don't beat yourself up for, you know, use of iPads or anything else thinking that your kids might not be social, but I do have to imagine that absolutely constantly, if you look at teenagers today, just constant presence there as their means of interaction, it does have to take something away from their ability to personally and professionally interact with people like that.
Absolutely. We were extremely strict about it with my daughter in the beginning. And then, you know, the pandemic happened, and unfortunately we leaned on it far too much. And so we really tried to find creative outlets of using technology. You know, she has this app that she paints on the iPad with, and she'll sit and paint on the iPad for hours. And
my son does that.
Yeah, I love that. I save all her paintings. I think it'll be so cool to look back one day. So we try to do things like that. But it's definitely something I think about, especially when she just got signed up for kindergarten and they're handing out iPads to every kid immediately. And my husband and I were like, wow, this has started already. Yeah. This is amazing. You know, I think there's something, as much as I am a huge proponent of technology, I also really have to force myself to kind of slow down and stop using it. And I think that's kind of the beauty of the pandemic as well. Oh, yeah. I put a lot of that away and just focused on being in the moment with my daughter and being in the moment with my family and de-stressing at the end of the day and getting back to the roots of what bring us joy, you know, hiking, kayaking, and gardening. And I think it's been kind of amazing. I'm sort of sad to see the pace picking back up a lot. And we need to try to hold on to that for sure.
Yeah, sounds like you maybe need to move to Maine, but you know.
Yes. I live in Westchester, and we're, I have a lot of trees, and we're on the Hudson a lot.
Oh,
and,
nice. Yeah.
But Maine is beautiful. Yeah, that would be amazing.
We got a lobsters, you know. Yeah. To bring it back to the technology part of it, for some reason, this is like one of those technical, I watch a video on the history of gears kind of questions, but how much time does a client, over the process of designing a building, how much time does a client actually spend with you or by themselves? How's that normally happen in the VR viewing of a project?
So let's think about how to talk about this, I guess, in terms of how we used to do it. So we used to set it up as a series of design presentations where you're, you know, presenting for a few hours and then you're going away and working, you're coming back and presenting. I do think the amount of time that they're spending with us in the arena is longer. Mm-hmm. So if you were presenting for an hour or two, you know, on paper or on screen, sometimes we're spending, you know, 4 to 6 to a whole day, you know, hours in the arena with them, depending on how big the project is and what we're going through. So in the beginning, I think the time is probably more intense for each presentation.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think it starts to slow down towards the construction document and construction administration phase, because they've already seen it, they've experienced it, they've been part of the process. And so they know what they're talking about, and they don't have to be as involved in those phases of the process.
Right.
So I think potentially it sort of evens out, because it's more intensive in the beginning and then slower towards the end.
Right.
So it's about the same.
That makes sense, that the bigger, what's the word I'm looking for? The wide sweeping decisions that affect a lot are happening more so in the beginning. And then as that kind of gets solidified, it starts to get into the smaller details, and it would almost be like a micromanaging or something at that point, I would imagine, for a client to be like, well, are you going to use a 2/16 screw there? Or,
Right. And so they tend to just say, oh, I've seen it all. I'm in full agreement. You guys just run with it. Whereas I think previously clients were very interested in, let's do a page turn at 25, 50, 75, 100. And now we're not doing that as much. So,
yep.
Yeah, I think it probably evens out. That's interesting. I'd never thought about that comparison before.
Yeah, we did quite a bit of work for what is the BIM management software company?
Autodesk.
But then there's another one. This is horrible, and I'm not remembering a client that paid me a lot of money and sent us around the world. But it's not Autodesk, Erky something. I don't know, but they have the software that manages all of a project for like a downtown building going up, where you can you have the model and you have all the emails, you have all the PDFs, you can just
like Newforma or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you. There we go, Newforma. Which is interesting because Newforma now owns an app that I developed years ago because they bought the app company that I had design the app. So now it's just on a digital shelf in Newforma's catalog.
That's great.
But so they, to sit in on the interviews, we did mostly video work for them where we got their client testimonials, and to sit in and listen about, testimonial after testimonial of people using this as, essentially a fairly relatively new thing within the building environment, design environment. It's amazing, the efficiency and the ability to actually pinpoint who messed up, and cost a project $100,000 because there was a 3-hour delay. It's amazing the accountability and the exactness with which a software like that can hold a building project to. Right. And you have to imagine that this virtual reality in the design process is doing the same thing. Like you were saying, get those, like, what about that odd corner back over there that we can actually interact with now, where before you never would have shown us that. It's got to be a better overall end result for having it than for not having it. But there has to be some downsides that are being worked on to be overcome. What are the things that need to be improved about this process of virtual reality design work and presentation right now?
The first thing that comes to mind is something that we've talked about quite a lot here. So our ultimate goal, I think, with this is to not have to ever print construction documents again. So I think
I hate printing.
I think that there is a bit of time wasted in having to do that still. And so what we're looking to do, and what we're successfully doing on many projects, is immersing all of the consultants into the model with us. We do walkthroughs with the consultants. We've done a few projects where the contractor is also using the model. They're doing, all their takeoffs on the model. They're walking their subs through the model. When they have a question, we're pulling up the model and we're reviewing it together. That's been very helpful, especially during the pandemic where you can't always go on site. So between, FaceTime and us walking through the model together, we can very quickly solve problems. But I think it's that it's such a great tool, and not everyone is utilizing it to its full capacity. So we need to get everyone on board, including, government agencies that are a bit antiquated. and figure out how we're not having to go through this process of printing out construction documents, submitting everything to the DOB. Let's get the DOB walking through the model with us so that we don't have to go through that process. And potentially that could save time for everyone and also give everyone a much better understanding of the job, because essentially what you're designing is literally what is built.
Right.
So it would be a great way to capture it, for all time as a model that you could always go back to.
So do you think that eventually on site, instead of a huge set of drawings, somewhere in the job trailer or whatever, there'll be more so a screen that you can just easily navigate?
Absolutely.
And actually, probably I think mark on in live time and kind of make updates and everything too.
I think it'll be beyond that. I think it'll be similar to, our tool belt. I think that we will all be in it together, walking through it. We might even be, in VR together and walking through it. I think it'll be extremely immersive as we're, shifting things around and solving an issue that's come up on site or a conflict.
Right.
So we're doing that already with a lot of our consultants, but I don't think that enough consultants and enough contractors are utilizing, Revit models and all of the software that's out there to its full capacity to be able to work within this technological realm.
Where's the hologram technology at in this point? That's what I want.
I know.
That'd be so nice. Like no one's putting on glasses or anything else, and it's just Tupac dancing up there for your hologram.
Oh, that would be great.
Right. But that ability, especially for the HVAC people, like to know
exactly.
And when you eliminate all of a building but leave the HVAC systems, I've seen these engineering drawings or like models that you can spin that's just the HVAC, and it's mind-blowing. And how on earth did you do that before being able to 3D model and know what's going to run into what? It's just
a lot of time spent on site with the subs.
Are you of the position that you have to go out on site and tell people they've done things wrong?
All the time. Absolutely.
How do you do that?
Honesty. Again, I go back to the honesty. I'm very honest with them about what's wrong, and then I'm right there with them to help figure out the solution.
Mm-hmm. So as a if you have a 5-year-old, I'm going to lump you into a little bit of maybe a Gen X or or Y or Z, slightly behind me a little ways. And I was having a very interesting conversation with a client the other day she's in her late 20s, and some of the difficulties she's had working with male photographers that are like over a certain age. It's like this dynamic that's like, man, I'm the one controlling the purse strings to giving you this job and managing you here and asking you to do what I need to market this. And yet you're treating me this way and belittling me, not directly, but indirectly through your, behavior and everything else. How have you, what's been your learning process of how to handle, the construction environment is, typically kind of, shall we say toxic masculinity or whatever else that the buzzword is right now. How have you learned to deal with that? Because I know from some of my clients that one of the best architects in Maine, Carol Wilson, she's in her 50s probably, but she's a very straightforward but extremely nice person, but she gets things done. And to talk to her like behind the scenes at a photo shoot about some of the things she's had to deal with is like, wow, that's all right. You just don't, as a guy, you don't sometimes consider that, For you, what's your learning process been like, and where have you had to come to? What have you had to learn to succeed at what you're doing? Because obviously you are.
I had to find my voice, I think, so I was lucky enough to work in a very small firm early in my career, and we, as employees there, you got thrown into everything. And so I was doing things probably that were a bit over my head at that point, but I learned so much by being thrown in the fire, as we like to say in architecture firms. I think it was really about finding my voice, because I learned that when I didn't find my voice, that's when mistakes would happen. So I had to learn how to speak up, to stand up for myself, and learn how to kind of communicate with them in a way that they're not going to, bristle against me, that they're going to want to help, be a team member, work with me. So I think, my mom credits it a lot to my Southern roots. It's a lot of kindness. It's a lot of smiles, but it's also being very thorough about what your intention is and what you need to happen at the end of the day. But it's not, dropping something in their lap and walking away. It's being very thorough about your intention and then helping to solve the problem as well. So I think it's that mix of all of it,
That's some real insight there. This is what my wife keeps telling me about our kids, that I shouldn't just go there, drop it in their lap and say, this is what you have to do. Have fun figuring it out, because life's hard, buddy. See ya. I'm going surfing. That dynamic is my natural go-to. I'm like, here's the problem. You're getting paid to do it. Solve it. And that's so wrong. I understand that doesn't work, but it's my natural tendency, because I'm very not confrontational naturally, unless I'm really in a realm that I really, really know. And even then, it's just like, it's so weird. But to be able to communicate in a way that makes people feel like you're on a team and I'm going to help you do this, and it's something very important that has to be done. That's those are those interpersonal communication classes in college that I really enjoyed, but I needed them so much that it was hard for me to actually absorb everything that they were saying. And it's taken me a midlife crisis to really figure it out. So
my mother went back and got her master's in psychology when I was a teenager, and she used to practice on us a lot. And while I hated it as a teenager, I definitely think it has helped me learn how to communicate well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, that's no, I can tell just by interacting with you that you're like, we had a 4-star general was the mayor of our town here, Biddeford. He retired here in Biddeford Pool, and he ran for mayor and won. And immediately, like, my preconceived idea, I worked on the Historic Preservation Committee when I first moved to Maine for this town, Biddeford. And my preconceived idea of like, I'm going to be in this meeting with a 4-star general. And I was like in my mid-20s, like a architect trying to establish myself in a firm, blah, blah, blah. And so my preconceived idea of this 4-star...
That's very intimidating.
This 4-star general, right? I'm like, this guy is like, he's way up there in the echelons of our country, This guy has achieved some serious stuff. He's going to be such an a-hole. And he was like, from the get-go, like just walking in the door, there was some presence about him that was like, I'm going to follow that guy anywhere. Like, he was the most soft-spoken, humble, like, it's just like, I'm getting goosebumps right now talking about it. It's one of those things. That's so weird. But in Wallace Nutting, and Wallace, if you're listening, I don't know if you're alive still or not, but that guy, he was amazing. He was just one of those people who could communicate, and you thought like, there's no ill intent in this guy, and I'm going to follow him into battle, whatever it is. And to be able to exude that and to learn how to communicate in that way, I've done my best work photographically when I'm working with people like that. For some reason, there's certain people that can just kind of go in front of you and say, this is kind of what we're looking to do. We really like what you do. Now we're going to stand over here while you do it, and we're just going to cheer. And it's such a interesting thing to interact and work with people, and to be able to pick up on the ones that, wow, these people, they've have something figured out here, and it's drawing more out of me because of it. And in just communicating with you, even through this odd little, electronic thing that you're in New York and I'm in Maine, I can still pick up on that. You're someone who, communicates well and is able to share an idea and engage and be present. And that's yep. Kudos anyways.
Thank you. I love that about my job. I absolutely love that I get to meet so many different people and engage them in so many different ways and solve problems every day. I mean, that's really, I think what I thrive on is that there's a problem they come to us with or a vision they want to achieve, and being able to work with everyone through the process in order to achieve that. It's amazing. It's a tough industry to be in. And I think that still excites me every single day after 20 years of being in the industry is the opportunity to do that. So I love what I do. And thank you for that. It's been a long road of learning and different experiences, but it's great to still get to do it every day.
Awesome. Well, that's a real positive note to wrap this conversation up on. We're all happy, shiny people here, and with that, but hey, it's been really interesting talking to you. It looks like you might be looking over Central Park or something there behind you. I don't know where you're
the
at,
skyline behind us. Yeah.
Oh, look at that! It comes in. Yeah, when you turned around, everything the aperture corrected for it. And,
I'm in the really green room in our office. We get great natural light in here, so it's a nice room to hang out in.
Nice. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk with us. It was really interesting to hear about what you're doing, and I've wanted to talk to someone who's involved with VR design and utilizing that to the level that you guys are. And so it's really interesting to hear about that and see the benefits and where it needs to progress and everything else. So, thanks for sharing.
Thank you, Trent. It was lovely talking to you.